So Liam Lawson's actually having a pretty good season this year. He's ninth in the championship with 43 points, and he's looking pretty good compared to his teammate Arvid Lindblad. But despite all of this, I still think he's in trouble and could be out of a seat, potentially for next year. And in this video, I just want to discuss my feelings on why I think Liam Lawson might be in trouble, who they might replace him with, but also where Liam Lawson could go and maybe continue his F1 career. And before I get into it, if you guys do enjoy the video, please hit the subscribe button, because I'm on about 20 subscribers and it's pretty demoralizing every time I look at it right now. So let's first look at Lawson's career. So he joined F1 in 2023 when Daniel Ricciardo injured his wrist at Zandvoort. He was subbed in with about 1 or 2 practice sessions, and he had a pretty impossible task ahead of him. He was going up against a pretty experienced Yuki Tsunoda and just needed to hold his own against him. And he kind of did. In his first race at Zandvoort, he actually managed to finish ahead of Yuki Tsunoda, though I think Tsunoda had like a bad strategy or had something wrong with his pit stop. For the rest of 2023, he was kind of there or thereabouts. He was closer in some qualifying races and then further back in others. He got ahead at like turn 4 or 5 in Japan and then ended up falling back, I think, behind for the rest of the race. And then there were also the races like Qatar where he was kind of nowhere in qualifying, but it's a high-speed track, so it was probably just being out of training really for F1 at that time. Despite that, he managed to score 2 points, which is pretty respectable for someone who's never driven in F1 before and was kind of substituted in mid-season. Expected to learn a car that he'd never driven before in a series that he'd never raced. And then that was kind of it for about a year. He went back to the sidelines as reserve at RB, but everyone kind of knew that he was going to be coming back sooner or later. And Daniel Ricciardo in 2024 was having a very underwhelming season. He had a few high points like Miami and Canada qualifying, but other than that, he wasn't really doing much. So around Singapore, Red Bull decided that they were going to replace Daniel Ricciardo with Liam Lawson in probably one of the worst handled driver transfers ever. But then Liam Lawson was in the car from Kota onwards, and from that point he had a pretty successful campaign. He managed to get points on his debut race back and looked a bit more convincing than Yuki Tsunoda, to be honest. He managed 4 points for the rest of 2024, which is a decent kind of haul of points, and it was more than he got in 2023. And then at the end of 2024, the news came. He was going to be a Red Bull driver. Now, if you were being promoted to the top team at any other team, this would probably be the best news of your life. But obviously at Red Bull, it's a little bit different. So he joined Red Bull, he did all the marketing stuff before the season, and people were wondering if he was just going to end up like all the other second drivers, or if he was going to be able to make a difference. So we get to Australia, and we get to qualifying. He missed FP3 due to a technical issue, so probably being like half a second off Verstappen would be acceptable. But what ensued was a total disaster. He had no confidence on the soft tyre and was knocked out in Q1 after locking up twice in qualifying. And then we went to China. In the sprint qualifying, he was out in Q1 and I think last, and in the main qualifying, he was out in Q1 and last. In both these race events, he didn't make any ground. In Australia, he crashed because for some reason they left him out on mediums on a wet track, and in China, he was just plain slow. Though there was the caveat that they'd apparently tried an experimental setup on his car, which he discussed in a podcast recently on the High Performance Podcast. So then after China, there was a lot of rumours. Is he going to be sent back to VCARB mid-season and replaced with Yuki Tsunoda, or are they going to give him a chance at Japan, which is a track he knew quite well from his Super Formula days? And the answer was pretty brutal from Red Bull. After China, it was announced that Yuki Tsunoda was going to join Red Bull for the first time ever, and that Liam Lawson was going to spend the rest of the season at VCARB. Now, this must have been a pretty damaging blow to Lawson, and I think for most drivers it was probably going to end up as a disastrous rest of the season for him. And he did okay. When he went back to VCARB, it was pretty clear that Isaac Hadjar was just a lot faster, particularly in qualifying and mostly in execution. Like Lawson would just have some laps where he did not get any pace out of the car and just had no grip because maybe the tyre prep was off. But there were a few highs. He had P6 in Austria, which I think was the best position he got. And overall, he had a solid season when it came to races. His race pace was okay and was more of a match for Hadjar than his qualifying pace. But things were unclear. What was going to happen next year? Were they going to keep him or were they going to replace him with another junior? Well, Hadjar ended up getting promoted to Red Bull, which meant there was a vacant seat in VCARB because Yuki Tsunoda was leaving. He was going to be the reserve driver for Red Bull. So there was a vacant seat, which ended up going to Arvid Lindblad, which meant that Lawson was safe for now. So then we go into 2026 with the new regulations. This was a chance for Lawson to regain some of his reputation again and make a mark on his career. And so far, he's doing okay. As I said earlier, he's got 43 points and he's ninth in the championship as of the Hungarian Grand Prix, and he's ahead of his rookie teammate Arvid Lindblad. Overall, as a pairing, they are pretty close together. Sometimes, obviously, Lindblad is further back because he's a rookie and maybe he has a scrappy lap or two. But I'd say out of all the driver lineups, they're fairly fairly well balanced. But I personally don't think that that's enough for Liam Lawson. I think that if he wanted a chance to stay in the Red Bull team at least, or just the Red Bull and VCARB teams, he needed to be very much convincingly beating Lindblad. I'm on about like every qualifying and every race, which leads me to my next point, that I think he is going to be sacked for next year from VCARB. If you've seen my driver lineup prediction, then you'll know that I think Tsolov is going to end up in that car. I personally don't rate Tsolov that high, but I'm going to do a separate video on him soon. Comment if you would like to see that and my analysis on him. So the question is, where would Liam Lawson go if he gets fired? So I think one of the options for him is Williams. I know they've just re-signed Albon and Sainz, but I'm not convinced by Albon, and I think that if they could get Lawson, they might potentially go for that swap. Now, this would probably have to happen at 2028 at the earliest, so Lawson would end up spending a year out, which could end up hurting his reputation. Somewhere he might be able to go immediately is Alpine. They've obviously got Gasly and Colapinto, and Colapinto has not yet had his contract officially renewed. Well, the public doesn't know if he's had his contract renewed, so as far as we know, there's still a chance he could go there. And I think that would be a solid place for him. They've scored a lot of points this season, and they've got an upgrade coming to the Netherlands, which is hopefully going to boost them a bit more. Aston Martin could be another option if Alonso retires, or even if Stroll decides to give up F1 this season. So I think these are the three options for him. It would offer him a way out of the Red Bull Academy, and maybe for him to have a successful career as a midfielder. But before this Netherlands weekend, there was some breaking news. Isaac Hadjar has fractured his wrist, and Liam Lawson is going to drive for Red Bull. Now, this is a big opportunity for Lawson. If he can prove something in that Red Bull car, maybe get him within 3 or 4 tenths of Verstappen, it could maybe revive his career. Because Lindblad, in my opinion, is not the most convincing prospect at the moment. Sure, he's doing well for a rookie, but I feel like if he was a really promising talent, he would be a lot further ahead than Lawson, because you have to remember that Lawson and Tsunoda were fairly close in performance, and Tsunoda, as you saw, did not fare well in that Red Bull either, and was sacked as a reserve driver. So I do think if you get a top driver against Lawson or Tsunoda, you end up with a driver who's probably going to be 4 tenths ahead of them, kind of like Sainz is doing to Albon at Williams. So there is a chance that a Lawson and Tsolov lineup could be retained, which would actually give Red Bull a decent benchmark to see how Tsolov is. What he can't afford to do this weekend is bin in the car, be completely dead slow, or just make a load of mistakes. He just needs to have a solid, clean weekend where hopefully the field spread will allow him to safely get into Q3, because he's got that on this side. The problem with the Red Bull second drivers in the ground effect era was that the qualifying sessions were so close that they would end up being knocked out even if they were just 3 tenths off Verstappen. So he's got a bit more of a cushion. And obviously, if Red Bull are bad this weekend, that is going to lead to them probably being knocked out in Q2 if the performance is that bad. But if not, he has the chance to prove himself again. Now, Hadjar has not been very convincing in race pace against Verstappen, so if Lawson can maybe show that he's a bit closer in the races, as he has been historically in his career, then that maybe could open another future at Red Bull for him. And it'll also depend on how Hadjar does for the rest of the season. If he continues being this underwhelming in races, then maybe they'll consider swapping them again. But either way, I think Lawson has got a few options in other teams in F1. And obviously, if F1 doesn't work out, then there's plenty of other series for him. He's clearly a very talented racing driver. And I'd say Alex Albon was actually a driver who was in a situation somewhat similar to Liam Lawson. He'd obviously gone to the main team and failed after being at the junior team for a bit before, and then was essentially spat out of the programme. Well, he was kept as a reserve driver at Red Bull for 2021, but that was about all they could offer. But then Williams came knocking for 2022, and he actually ended up back on the grid. So I don't think it's out of the question that Lawson could receive an offer from another team and end up back on the grid. One of the 3 teams I suggested, maybe. So he would probably end up staying in F1 rather than going to another series. But there are so many other series available now. There's like Formula E, there's obviously World Endurance if you wanted to go and do Le Mans or something. So there's plenty of options for him. And of course, there is the option that he would stay at VCARB or go to Red Bull as reserve driver. So this would keep him kind of around F1. But then you see other drivers all the time, like Felipe Drugovich, who do that route of staying as a reserve driver, but nothing really comes out of it because their time has come and gone, basically. But Lawson, I say, is obviously he's got the advantage that he's actually been in Formula 1, so he's been able to showcase the talent he's got, which means that he has an advantage over others like Drugovich, who you don't really hear from anymore, or even like Teo Pourchaire, who people tip for a seat. He's got that advantage over them, that he's got race experience in Formula 1, and for any team, that's more valuable than taking a punt on a rookie And it also means he has experience driving these energy weird cars, which maybe for a rookie would be a bit more overwhelming. So I do think that any kind of midfield team would probably take him, but I do think that his chance at a top team would be gone. But as I said before, there's so many opportunities in motorsport now that you could really go to any other motorsport, and I'd say he'd probably succeed. You know, he's a good driver, and we see former F1 drivers succeeding all the time. So I hope you guys did enjoy this video. Please make sure you like and subscribe if you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next video in a few days. Bye.